The dust swirled around Isabella's worn boots as she stood in the center of the town square, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the gathered crowd, but she barely heard the words. All she could focus on was the shame burning her cheeks as curious eyes examined her like she was nothing more than livestock, too big for most men to handle. Someone whispered from the crowd, and Isabella's shoulders slumped further. At 23, she had grown taller and stronger than most women in the territory, her hands calloused from years of hard work on her late father's ranch. Now, with debts crushing down on her like a rock slide, she had become nothing more than a commodity to be sold. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty street of Esperanza, Texas, where dreams came to die and hope was a luxury few could afford. Isabella Morales had once believed in dreams. She had once believed in love. But that was before the drought claimed their cattle, before her father's death left her drowning in debt, and before the bank had given her an ultimatum: find a husband willing to pay her father's debts, or lose everything. The town's eligible bachelors had already taken their turns examining her like they might a horse they were considering purchasing. Too tall, they said. Too independent. Too much woman for their tastes. One by one they had walked away, leaving Isabella standing alone under the scorching Texas sun, her dignity stripped away with each rejection. Do I hear $50? The auctioneer called out, his voice cutting through Isabella's thoughts like a knife. $50. That was all she was worth to these people. Less than the price of a good horse, the crowd murmured, but no hands were raised. Isabella closed her eyes, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. She thought of her father, of how proud he had been of their little ranch, of the way he had always told her she was perfect just as she was. If only he could see her now. $40 then. The auctioneer's voice grew more desperate. Surely someone needs a strong wife who can work the land. Still, silence answered him. Isabella felt her world crumbling around her like adobe walls in a flash flood. Soon she would have nothing. No home, no family, no future. She would be turned out onto the harsh frontier with nothing but the dress on her back and the bitter taste of rejection in her mouth. That's when she heard the sound of spurs jingling against wooden planks. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, and Isabella opened her eyes to see a man walking toward the auction platform with the confident stride of someone who owned the ground he walked on. He was tall, taller even than she was, with broad shoulders that stretched his work-worn shirt and hands that looked like they could gentle a wild Mustang, or build a house with equal skill. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with laugh lines around dark eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. A black hat sat tilted on his head, shadowing features that were ruggedly handsome in a way that made Isabella's breath catch in her throat. But it wasn't his appearance that stopped her heart. It was the way he looked at her, not like she was livestock to be evaluated, not like she was a burden to be endured. He looked at her like she was a sunrise over the mountains, beautiful and precious and worth getting up early to see. I'll take her, he said simply, his voice carrying across the square with quiet authority. For whatever price she thinks she's worth. The auctioneer blinked in confusion. Sir, we haven't even started the bidding properly. I said I'll take her. The stranger's voice was firm but not harsh, and when he looked up at Isabella, she saw something in his dark eyes that made her heart flutter like butterfly wings. Name your price, señorita. What do you think you're worth? Isabella stared down at him, her mind reeling. In all her 23 years, no one had ever asked her what she thought she was worth. Her father had loved her, yes, but even he had spoken of her eventual marriage as a business arrangement. The men who had looked her over this morning had discussed her value like she wasn't even present, but this stranger, this cowboy with gentle eyes and calloused hands, was asking her to name her own. Price, she started, then stopped. Her throat felt dry as desert sand. I don't understand. He stepped closer to the platform, and she could see that his shirt was clean but mended in several places, his boots worn but well cared for. He wasn't a rich man, but there was something about him that spoke of wealth that couldn't be counted in coins. What I mean is, he said, his voice gentle, what would make you feel like you were valued? Not sold, not bought, but valued. What would make this right for you? Tears pricked at Isabella's eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of shame. No one had spoken to her with such kindness since her father's death. She thought of the ranch, of the debt that hung over her like a storm cloud. of the dreams she had buried along with her father. $800, she whispered, barely loud enough to be heard. It was the amount needed to pay off the debts and save the ranch. An impossible sum that no one would ever pay for a wife, especially not for someone like her. The crowd gasped and began to murmur. $800 was more than most men in the territory made in 2 years. It was a fortune, an outrageous amount that no sane person would pay. But the cowboy just nodded as if she had asked for $8 instead of $800. $800 it is, he said, pulling a leather pouch from his vest. The crowd fell silent as he counted out gold coins, more money than most of them had ever seen in one place. But I want to be clear about something, señorita. This isn't a purchase. This is a partnership. You're not being sold. You're being valued. Isabella's knees nearly gave out. She gripped the edge of the platform to steady herself as the stranger, her savior, handed the money to the stunned auctioneer. "What's your name?" she managed to ask. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture so respectful it made her heart ache. "James Sullivan, ma'am, but my friends call me Sully, and if you'll have me, I'd like to be your friend." The formalities were completed quickly after that. The debt was paid, the papers signed, and suddenly Isabella found herself walking beside this mysterious cowboy toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. The crowd dispersed, buzzing with gossip about the crazy gringo who had paid a fortune for the Mexican girl nobody else wanted. But Isabella barely heard them. Her mind was spinning with questions. Who was this man? Why had he done this? What did he expect from her? As if reading her thoughts, Sully helped her into the wagon with a gentleness that made her eyes water. His hands were warm and steady, and for a moment their fingers touched. The contact sent a jolt through Isabella's entire body, and she saw something flicker in his dark eyes that told her he had felt it too. "I suppose you're wondering why I did this," he said as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. "The thought had crossed my mind," Isabella replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Sully was quiet for a moment as he guided the horses out of town and onto the dusty trail that led toward the horizon. The afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of gold and amber, and Isabella found herself studying his profile as he drove. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said finally, his voice so soft she had to lean closer to hear him. "Childbirth. The baby, too. For a long time I thought that was it for me. Figured I'd spend the rest of my days alone on the ranch, just me and the cattle and the ghosts of what might have been." Isabella's heart clenched at the pain in his voice. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded, accepting her sympathy with grace. She was tiny, delicate as a flower. Everyone said we made a perfect pair because I was so big and strong, and she was so small and fragile. I spent our whole marriage trying to protect her from the world, trying to keep her safe." His hands tightened on the reins, and Isabella saw the muscles in his jaw work as he fought with memories. "But I couldn't protect her from the thing that killed her," he continued. "Couldn't protect her from her own body failing her. And I realized something, standing there beside her grave. I realized that maybe what I need isn't someone I have to protect. Maybe what I need is someone who can stand beside me, someone strong enough to face whatever comes." He turned to look at Isabella then, and the raw honesty in his eyes took her breath away. "When I saw you up there today, holding your head high despite everything, refusing to let them break you, I saw strength, real strength, the kind that can't be bought or sold or auctioned off. And I thought, maybe she's what I've been looking for. Maybe we're what each other has been looking for." Isabella stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "You don't even know me," she managed. "I know enough," Sully said simply. "I know you're brave enough to stand up there and face that humiliation rather than just walk away and let the debt go unpaid. I know you're strong enough to work your father's ranch even when times got tough. And I know you're proud enough to ask for what you're really worth, even if you thought nobody would pay it." The wagon rolled along in comfortable silence after that. The only sounds the creak of wheels and the steady clip-clop of hooves on the hard-packed earth. Isabella found herself stealing glances at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to speak aloud. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Sully guided the wagon off the main trail and up a smaller path that wound between rolling hills dotted with mesquite trees and prairie grass. Is this your land? Isabella asked, looking around at the vast expanse of Texas countryside stretching as far as the eye could see. Our land, Sully corrected gently. I meant what I said back there. This is a partnership. Everything I have, we share. Everything we build together. Isabella felt tears threatening again, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough for one lifetime. Instead, she focused on the beauty of the landscape around them, on the way the evening light turned everything golden and magical. It's beautiful, she breathed. Wait until you see the house, Sully said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. 20 minutes later, they crested a hill and Isabella gasped. Spread out before them was a valley that looked like something from a dream. A clear stream wound through the middle of it, bordered by cottonwood trees whose leaves whispered secrets to the evening breeze. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and nestled against a stand of oak trees was a house that made Isabella's heart soar. It wasn't a grand mansion or a fancy Victorian home like the wealthy ranchers built closer to town, but it was solid and welcoming, with a wide front porch and windows that glowed warm in the fading light. Smoke curled from the chimney, and Isabella could see flower boxes under the windows that someone had tended with love. Maria planted those flowers, Sully said quietly, following her gaze. I couldn't bear to let them die after. I've been taking care of them myself, though I'm not much of a gardener. Isabella looked at the carefully tended flower boxes, at this strong man who had been nurturing his dead wife's flowers for 3 years, and felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't just about debt or convenience or practical arrangements. This man had a heart capable of deep, lasting love. The question was, would he ever be able to love again? As if reading her thoughts, Sully turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I should probably tell you, he said slowly. I won't expect you to be my wife in all ways right away. I know this is strange for you, all of this. I've got a spare room you can use until we figure out what this is between us. Isabella studied his face in the fading light and saw nothing but sincerity and respect. How long had it been since a man had treated her with such consideration? How long since anyone had cared about what she wanted or needed? Thank you, she said softly. That means more to me than you know. They reached the house just as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Sully helped Isabella down from the wagon, and again she felt that electric connection when their hands touched. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. Isabella, he said, her name rolling off his tongue like honey. That's a beautiful name. It suits you. My father chose it, she replied, looking up into his kind eyes. He said it meant pledged to God. He always told me that meant I was destined for something special. Maybe he was right, Sully said quietly. The next few weeks passed in a blur of new routines and growing familiarity. Isabella threw herself into life on the ranch with the same determination that had helped her survive her father's death and the subsequent financial struggles. She cooked hearty meals, tended the vegetable garden, helped with the cattle, and slowly began to make the house feel like a home. Sully was the perfect gentleman, respectful and kind but never presumptuous. He slept in the main bedroom while Isabella occupied the spare room, and he never made her feel uncomfortable or pressured. Instead, he seemed content to let their relationship develop naturally, like a friendship that might someday bloom into something more. And bloom it did, in small moments and quiet conversations. Like the morning Isabella woke early to find Sully already in the kitchen, making coffee with the practiced ease of a man who had been taking care of himself for years. He looked up when she entered, his hair still mussed from sleep, and smiled in a way that made her stomach flutter. Morning, he said, pouring her a cup of the strong dark brew. Sleep well? Better than I have in months, she admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. Their fingers brushed as she took the cup, and both of them paused, looking into each other's eyes with something that felt like recognition, or the evening they worked together to repair a section of fence that had been damaged by a storm. Isabella held the post steady while Sully hammered, and she found herself admiring the easy strength in his movements, the way his shirt stretched across his broad back, the competent way he handled every task. You're strong, he observed as she lifted a heavy post without complaint. Stronger than most men I know. Is that a problem? Isabella asked, suddenly self-conscious about her height and the muscles in her arms. Sully looked at her with surprise. Problem? Isabella, your strength is one of the most beautiful things about you. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like it's something to hide. It was comments like that. Small affirmations that built up her confidence like layers of adobe brick that began to heal the wounds left by years of being told she was too much, too big, too strong for any man to want. But the moment that changed everything happened on a warm evening in late spring, 6 weeks after their unconventional wedding day. Isabella was in the garden, harvesting vegetables for dinner, when she heard the sound of riders approaching fast. She stood up, shading her eyes against the setting sun, and felt her blood turn to ice when she saw who was riding toward the house. Ramon Castellanos sat tall in his saddle, flanked by 4 of his men. Isabella's former suitor was the son of the wealthiest landowner in the territory, a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. When Isabella had refused his marriage proposal 2 years ago, back when she still had choices, he had been furious. She had hoped never to see him again. But here he was, riding onto Sully's land like he owned it, his dark eyes fixed on Isabella with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Sully emerged from the barn at the sound of hooves, his hand instinctively moving to the gun at his hip when he saw the riders. Isabella hurried toward him, her heart pounding with a fear she hadn't felt since the auction block. "Isabella, mi amor," Ramon called out as he dismounted, his voice dripping with false charm. "You look well. Marriage suits you. What do you want, Ramon?" Isabella asked, positioning herself slightly behind Sully's broad shoulder. She felt rather than saw him tense at the obvious familiarity between her and this unwelcome visitor. Ramon's smile was sharp as a knife blade. "Straight to the point, as always. Very well. I've come to make your husband an offer he can't refuse." Sully stepped forward slightly, his body language protective, but not aggressive. "I'm listening," he said evenly. $2,000, Ramon announced, as if he were offering them a great gift. $2,000 for the girl, and you can keep the land. Everyone wins. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella felt as though she had been slapped, the casual way Ramon reduced her to a commodity making her feel sick. But it was Sully's reaction that truly scared her. His entire body went rigid, and when he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "The lady is not for sale," he said simply. Ramon laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Come now, Sullivan. We both know this was a business arrangement. You needed a wife, she needed someone to pay her debts, but I can offer you much more than you paid for her. Think of it as a profit on your investment." Isabella watched in fascination and growing dread as something dangerous flickered in Sully's dark eyes. This was a side of him she had never seen before, the side that had survived on the frontier, that had built a ranch from nothing, that had learned to protect what was his. "I said no," Sully repeated, his hand moving closer to his gun. "And I suggest you and your men ride out of here before this gets unpleasant." Ramon's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, gringo. I always get what I want one way or another. And I want Isabella. Why?" The word burst from Isabella's lips before she could stop it. "Why now? You had your chance 2 years ago and you didn't want me then. Called me too headstrong, too independent. So why do you want me now?" Ramon's smile turned predatory. "Because now I know what you're really worth. A woman who can inspire a man to pay $800 sight unseen? A woman strong enough to work this land and bear strong sons? You're wasted on this cowboy, Isabella. You belong with a man who can appreciate your true value." Isabella felt bile rise in her throat. Even now, even when Ramon claimed to want her, it wasn't really about her. It was about possession, about winning, about taking something that belonged to someone else. "Get off my land," Sully said, his voice like winter wind. "Now." Ramon mounted his horse again, but his eyes never left Isabella's face. "This isn't over, mi amor. I'll have you one way or another. And when I do, you'll remember that I tried to do this the easy way." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a brush fire as Ramon and his men rode away. Isabella stood frozen in the yard, watching them disappear over the hill, her mind reeling with fear and confusion. "Isabella." Sully's voice was gentle again, all the dangerous hardness gone. "Look at me." She turned to face him, and the concern in his eyes nearly undid her. "He won't give up," she whispered. "Ramon always gets what he wants. Always. And now that he's decided he wants me." "Hey." Sully reached out and cupped her face in his calloused hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I won't let him hurt you. I won't let anyone hurt you. Do you understand me? Isabella stared up at him, seeing the fierce protectiveness in his expression. And suddenly all the careful walls she had built around her heart came crashing down. This man, this wonderful, gentle, strong man, was willing to stand against Ramon Castellanos for her. Not because she was his property, but because he cared about her as a person. Why? She asked, echoing her earlier question to Ramon. Why would you risk everything for me? We barely know each other. Sully was quiet for a long moment, his thumb stroking gently across her cheekbones. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but certain. Because somewhere in these past few weeks, you stopped being the woman I married out of convenience and started being the woman I can't imagine living without. Because when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I want to do is see your smile. Because when you laugh at something silly I've said, it feels like sunrise. Because you're not just strong in body, Isabella. You're strong in spirit, and that strength makes me want to be a better man. Isabella felt tears spill over and run down her cheeks. Sully, I love you, he said simply, the words falling between them like stones into still water. I didn't plan it, didn't expect it, but I love you. And I'll be damned if I'll let some rich boy take you away from me, because he's decided you're his new toy. Isabella stared up at him, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever loved her for her strength instead of in spite of it. I love you too, she whispered, and watched his face transform with joy and relief. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you asked me what I thought I was worth. Sully's smile was like the sun coming up over the mountains. He leaned down and kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Isabella felt like she was coming home after a long journey through the wilderness. But even as she melted into his arms, even as she finally allowed herself to believe in the possibility of happiness, a part of her mind remained focused on Ramon's parting words. This wasn't over. Men like Ramon didn't accept defeat gracefully, and Isabella knew with cold certainty that he would be back. The attack came 3 nights later, just before dawn, when the world was caught between darkness and light. Isabella woke to the sound of gunshots and Sully's voice shouting her name. She rolled out of bed, grabbing the rifle he had insisted she keep in her room, and ran toward the sound of conflict. What she saw when she reached the main room made her blood freeze. The front door had been kicked in, and 3 men were advancing on Sully, who had taken cover behind the overturned kitchen table. He was wounded, she could see blood on his shoulder, but he was still fighting, still protecting their home. Isabella didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle and fired, her shot taking down one of the intruders before he even knew she was there. The other 2 spun toward her, giving Sully the opening he needed to even the odds further. The gun battle was brief but vicious. When the smoke cleared, 2 of Ramon's men lay dead and the 3rd was wounded and fleeing into the pre-dawn darkness. Isabella and Sully stood among the wreckage of their home, both breathing hard, both alive. Are you hurt? Sully asked, pulling her into his arms despite his own injury. I'm fine. But you're bleeding. It's just a scratch, he assured her, though Isabella could see it was more than that. We need to get out of here. Ramon will be back with more men, and next time, we'll be ready, Isabella interrupted firmly. This is our home, Sully, our land. I won't run. Sully looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes, the steel in her spine, and felt his love for her grow even deeper. You're amazing, you know that, he said softly. I'm strong, Isabella corrected. Strong enough to stand and fight beside you, strong enough to face whatever comes. Isn't that what you said you wanted? A partner, not someone to protect. He cupped her face in his hands, mindless of the blood and gunpowder staining his fingers. I love you, Isabella Sullivan, more than I ever thought possible. And I love you, James Sullivan. Now let me take care of that wound, and then we'll figure out how to deal with Ramon once and for all. The final confrontation came a week later, in the town square where Isabella's story had begun. Ramon had returned as promised, this time with 12 men and a claim that Sully had stolen cattle from the Castellanos ranch. It was a lie, but Ramon's family had enough influence to make it stick if they wanted to. But Isabella had a plan. She walked into that town square alone, wearing the same dress she had worn on auction day, her head held high with the same pride and dignity that had first caught Sully's attention. The townspeople gathered to watch, expecting another spectacle, Another humiliation for the Mexican girl who had gotten above her station. "Ramon," she called out, her voice carrying across the square. "You want me? Come and take me. If you're man enough." Ramon smiled his sharp smile and stepped forward, confident in his victory. But he had made a crucial mistake. He had underestimated Isabella Morales Sullivan, and he had forgotten that she was no longer alone. "I knew you'd come to your senses," he said. "A woman like you needs a man who can handle her, who can give her the life she deserves." "You're right," Isabella said calmly. "I do need a man who can handle me, a man who sees my strength as a gift, not a burden. A man who loves me for who I am, not what I can do for him. A man who would fight the world for me, and who knows I would fight the world for him in return." She paused, letting her words sink in, then smiled with quiet triumph. "Fortunately, I already found that man, and he's standing right behind you." Ramon spun around to find Sully there, flanked by a dozen of their neighbors, men and women who had seen how the Sullivans treated each other, who had witnessed their love and partnership, and who had decided that some things were worth fighting for. "You have a choice, Castellanos," Sully said quietly. "You can ride out of here and never bother my wife again, or you can face the consequences of threatening an innocent woman and her family. What's it going to be?" For a moment, Isabella thought Ramon might actually draw his gun. His face was twisted with rage and humiliation, and she could see him calculating his odds. But even Ramon Castellanos wasn't fool enough to start a gunfight when he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "This isn't over," he snarled. But the words sounded empty now. The threat of a man who had lost and knew it. "Yes, it is," Isabella said firmly. "This is over, Ramon. Find another obsession." Ramon and his men rode out of town that day, and they never came back. Some said he moved his operations to California. Others claimed he went back to Mexico with his tail between his legs. Isabella didn't care what happened to him, as long as he stayed out of her life. The sun was setting over their valley as Isabella and Sully rode home together, her head resting against his shoulder, his arm tight around her waist. They had faced their first real test as a couple, and they had emerged stronger than ever. "No regrets?" Sully asked as they crested the hill and saw their house waiting for them, windows glowing warm in the gathering dusk. Isabella looked up at this man who had seen her true worth when no one else would, who had loved her strength and celebrated her independence, who had stood with her against the world and never once asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was. "Only one," she said with a smile that made his heart skip a beat. "What's that?" "I regret that it took so long to find you. I regret all the years I spent believing I was too much for anyone to love." Sully pulled their horse to a stop and turned in the saddle to face her fully. "You were never too much, Isabella. You were just waiting for someone who was enough to appreciate all that you are." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, while the Texas sky painted itself in shades of gold and crimson above them. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully in their fields, and smoke curled from the chimney of the home they were building together. 2 years later, Isabella stood on that same hill, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. But this time she wasn't alone. Sully stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on top of her head. And in her arms, she held their infant daughter, a tiny miracle with her father's dark eyes and her mother's determined chin. "What are you thinking about?" Sully asked softly, his breath warm against her hair. "That day in the town square," Isabella replied, adjusting the baby's blanket against the evening breeze. "How hopeless everything seemed. How sure I was that I would never be wanted or loved. And now?" Isabella leaned back against her husband's solid warmth, feeling his love surround her like a shield against the world. "Now I know that sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the beginning of something beautiful. Sometimes what feels like being sold is really just being found by the person who's been looking for you their whole life." Their daughter gurgled softly, reaching up with tiny fingers to touch Isabella's face. Isabella caught the small hand and kissed it gently, marveling at the perfect little nails, the impossibly soft skin. "She's going to be strong like her mama," Sully observed, watching their daughter try to grab a handful of Isabella's long, dark hair, and gentle like her papa. Isabella replied, "And she'll never doubt that she's loved exactly as she is." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, The Sullivan family made their way back to the house where love lived in every carefully tended corner, where strength and gentleness walked hand in hand, and where a woman who had once been told she was too much had finally found a man who was just enough. In the flower boxes under the windows, Maria's flowers bloomed alongside new varieties that Isabella had planted, a garden where past and present grew together in perfect harmony, where memories were honored and new dreams took root in fertile soil. Isabella Morales had been sold for being too big, too strong, too much woman for any ordinary man to handle. But James Sullivan wasn't an ordinary man. He was extraordinary in all the ways that mattered. In kindness, in courage, in the ability to see worth where others saw burden, beauty where others saw flaw. And as they settled into their evening routine, as Isabella nursed their daughter while Sully read aloud from a book of poetry, as they planned their tomorrow and dreamed their dreams together, Isabella knew with absolute certainty that she had finally found her place in the world. She was exactly the right size for this life, exactly strong enough for this love, exactly perfect for this man who had seen her true value when the whole world had tried to convince her she was worthless. Under the endless Texas sky, where stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet, and love stories were written in the language of trust and partnership and unshakable devotion, Isabella and Sully Sullivan lived happily ever after, not because their life was easy, but because they faced whatever came together as equals, as partners, as two hearts that had found their perfect match in each other. The auction block had been meant to be her ending. Instead, it had been her beginning, the first page of a love story that would be told around frontier fires for generations to come, the story of a woman who was sold for being too much and found by a man who knew she was exactly enough.